Welcome back to the Dr. Mo Show. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of hanging out with Cody Beals, who is the epitome of health is everything and non-traditional career choices. Good friend, the family I chose. That's how we roll. That's how we roll around here.
Oh, thanks, Maureen. It's good to be here. I can't believe we've known each other for this many years and we haven't done an interview like this before.
I know, right? We were talking, I was like, do you want to do a podcast? Because we need to do a podcast.
Hell yeah.
Absolutely. So tell me about, first of all, your classic training, right? So, because I know a little bit about a lot of things in your life. So tell me about your classic training and then what you do now. And we'll tie that into health challenges you sort of had both before and after entering professional triathlon.
Yeah. So, as a kid, academics were it for me. And I thought I'd get a physics PhD, and I embarked on that route. Like, I chose the most challenging engineering physics program in Canada, at least it was reputed to be. And I threw myself into that at the same time, training a ridiculous amount, like almost more than I train now as a professional athlete, while simultaneously juggling this really, really challenging course load. And Maureen, that crushed me. And pretty quickly, I realized academia wasn't going to be it for me.
Hmm.
And so after I graduated, I was kind of like my roadmap had gone off the rails. I thought I'd get this physics PhD, and then here I was as a 21-year-old feeling so burnt out with academia, I never wanted to touch it again. So I gave myself a summer to pursue triathlon. And one thing led to another, and here we are. I'm going into my 12th pro season now. So this was never really the plan. Like it just feels like this marvelous side quest that I kind of tumbled into and I've kept pursuing. But every year it's given me enough fun, excitement, adventure to keep going. But I think there's this perception that like it's this glamorous career, and we've had a lot of frank discussions about it. You're certainly not immune to burnout, even in some people's idea of what appears to be a dream job. So I think there's a lot we could talk about there.
It's funny that when you said that your essentially your side hustle became like your little side gig, all of a sudden you're like, it's 12 years later. So for me, I started on a health journey and then I started like popping in online trying to help people like because they were doing things and not doing them. I'm like, wait a minute, that's not how this works. And they're like, can you be my doctor? I'm like, I don't know, maybe. And 2.5 years later, the side gig becomes the full-time job sort of. And then, again, this was never the plan.
Do you think there's any truth to the expression if you love your hobby, don't make it your career? I've heard various wordings of that. I'm all over that sometimes. Some days it feels more truthful than others. I don't know.
You know what? I don't agree. I don't, because if you love your hobby, that means now, granted, I think there's a difference, right? If you like skiing, don't like you don't have to be a ski instructor. Like that's kind of an odd little, if you like
Sure.
playing
Yeah.
piano, it depends. If it's when I like reading, I'm not going to read for a living. I'm not going to read
Yeah.
audiobooks, right? But if something lights you up in that space, whatever that space is, and that's actually part of what I do in my career coaching for physicians is something will light them up about like I coached a woman who wanted to create planners. She's a mom with three kids and she loves like a beautiful paper planner, blah blah blah. She wanted to create this and the oddest thing, right? But she could create value from that. And that's, I think, where the difference is do you have the desire to share that with the world, make the world better, and create value for other people? In that case, monetize it from that point, because
Hmm.
the more value you create, the more money, which is just energy anyway, comes back at you.
Yeah. So your school of thought's more like if you find work that you love, you won't work a day in your life.
Yes.
Okay. I like that more. That's the positive. That's the glass half full view on it for me.
Oh, I'm idealistic as hell. You know that.
Yeah, I think for me though, like don't get me wrong, I really enjoy triathlon. But the metric I've kind of arrived at after actually talking this over with Sebastian Kienle, who's, if you're not familiar, multiple Ironman world champion, guy I respect tremendously. He just retired from triathlon racing last year. And his metric to continue in triathlon was you have to accept a lot of it's going to be miserable, but by and large, you have to be enjoying 51% of it, like more than half of it. So that's kind of how I keep forging ahead. I keep asking myself, am I enjoying the slim majority of this? Is that fun? And yeah, the answer's still been yes. But I think it's never the case that like every day is my dream job and I wake up, I explode out of bed to do my 6 hours of training and it's all sunshine and roses.
I know. I saw your recent post about getting outside, hanging out with Bean. You're like, just
Ah,
getting out the door, give yourself a
yeah.
check mark, you know?
It is a tough time of year too. I know you used to live a lot further north. Now you're in Texas. I'm in Guelph, Ontario, and the daylight is limited right now. Like it's practically already getting dark here, and it's mid-afternoon right now. And it's taken me many, many years to realize like there's this cyclical nature to not only my mental health, but also like my energy, my enthusiasm for training and life. And this is the time of year when it's hardest. We're a couple days from the solstice right now. And so I used to hold myself to a much higher standard in, November, December, January. And, I'm still ticking the boxes. I'm getting my job done. I'm negotiating contracts, getting my training done, prioritizing my recovery. But like, I'm not my best self right now. And that's okay. I have kind of a lower bar for this time of year.
Maybe your best self, though, is the one who understands that you don't have to be energetic all the time. Maybe
Yeah.
that is the
Yeah.
best self, the one who realizes that some days just suck.
Yeah. And the self is a little bit gentler with me than I was in the past.
And
My
I'm not one to even call you on that one. I am so hard on myself that I'm like, if I say anything, I'm going to get called on this.
that is the trickiest balance though of pro triathlon and probably equivalent to a lot of other careers, I'd imagine, knowing when to push yourself hard and when to be gentle with yourself. And for me, that's like a daily calculus because like I was saying, a lot of the training sessions, a lot of what I'm doing, not super fun, doesn't feel physically great. You're not getting the best cues from your body or your mind on it. But like there is this tightrope walk of how when do I push myself? When do I be gentle? And that's something I've routinely effed up in the past. And especially thinking back to those days I mentioned as a student athlete where I was, doing 40 to 60 hours a week of course load and training 20 to 30 hours a week. That was so far over the line of pushing myself. But that was like what I thought was the epitome of a tough, gritty professional athlete. Like I aspired to be, a training robot, like this automaton that would just execute training, execute the schoolwork, no feelings, no emotion around it. And you can do that for a period, but it's on borrowed time.
Well, and it's funny you say that because I had just watched a video yesterday by Dan Martell, who's one of my business coaches that I deeply respect. And the hustle won't work anymore. Like there comes a point in any career, whether it's triathlon, emergency medicine, physics, academia, the hustle just gets old
Yeah.
and it kills you. I mean,
Yeah.
well, sometimes it literally kills you. And I talk about this openly, that when I did Ironman Texas in 2022, I got cleared by cardiology because I had some post-COVID arrhythmia issues. So I got cleared by cardiology, but they never thought because I was fine on the outside, we didn't look in the vessels. And then I've had about a 30% reduction in my LDL, my bad cholesterol since then.
Mhm.
And in November, I was diagnosed with a 20% stenosis plaque in my LAD. So I have a 20% blockage in my artery, the largest artery in my
Is
heart.
that something you typically see in, advanced Ironman athletes like you?
Nope. That's
No.
um that's my food history.
Okay.
And I don't have family history, so that's earned.
Yeah.
That plaque is earned, unfortunately, for better or for worse. And now that we know that it's there, I make very different choices mostly.
Mhm.
I mean, because those grooves, those addictive grooves are there. They're not going anywhere. Sometimes I trip and fall into the ditch. It is what it is. Um, because food's a subtle foe for sure. Um, but I would prefer not to die. I have a lot to do.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Yeah,
that's
food is such a tough one to struggle with because, if people struggle with other, I'll call them substance abuse problems, the usual, you want to reach a point where you're not using that substance at all. It's not part of your life, but obviously we all need food. And I think that is the essence of why food challenges are the hardest to work around. And like my own history is one of disordered eating. And yeah, it's taken a long, long time to unwind that, the better part of 10 years to unwind like the physical and psychological ill effects from that. And I'll still sometimes catch myself in what I now see is like my historical eating disorder behaviors and have to catch myself and stop that. But yeah, those grooves are still there. I don't have to choose to be in them, but they're born pretty deep.
and I truly believe that. Uh, Dan actually said the goal is to kill the dragon while it's a little tiny baby dragon breathing a little smoke, not this big fire breathing thing. Well, unfortunately, I had 45 plus years of disordered eating.
Mm,
That's not going away overnight.
no.
And it's not going away without community. It's not going away without coaches, mentors, help, resources. Like I always joke, I'm like the remedial food addict because I need all the things.
Yeah.
But
Well,
45
and
years is a long time.
yeah. And I like your perspective too on, you do and will again trip and fall and you pick yourself up and you keep going because that's inevitable,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
you can't catastrophize it.
Oh, I'm good at catastrophizing. I mean, younger days, I kind of joke as a perfectionist in medical school, maybe a good enoughist.
Mm.
Um, because you can't, I mean, I could not be a perfectionist. I am not Matthew Marquardt. I was not doing professional triathlon while I was a medical student. I was married while I was a medical student, which I think that's a sport in and of itself.
Oh, yeah, can't imagine.
That was, I was joke. I did marriage and medical school together, the two hardest things I've ever done.
And you met your husband Greg in medical school, right?
So before, actually, we
Before, wow.
decided,
And
yeah,
you
we
survived
decided,
medical school together.
and residency in the same
Wow.
programs. Yes, we are still there. Um, yeah, we're a whole lot of crazy. Yeah, it was not easy, not easy. Trying to balance. I mean, we literally had 4 days off together a month throughout residency. That was it. And at the time, my brain was also because it was before that book. I wrote that. I started with the fodder for that book right after residency. Wrote it in 2021. Ha! Thanks. How cool is that? And I'm finally getting the audiobook done.
Nice.
So
Are you gonna read it yourself?
I wanted to, but yet again, back to that perfectionist thing. It will remain undone as long as I want to do it for
Mm,
myself.
yep.
So I have a contact and new friend that I met through the same group that I met Robbie G last week.
Yeah.
And she's Canadian as well. Obviously, I'm just hanging
You
out up
can't
there.
you can't get away from the Canadians here. You have an
No,
affinity
no.
for the Canadians, yeah.
I always did. I always did. And I apologize like a Canadian too. So that's great. I fit right in. But yeah, so she's going to read it. And my goal is to do a Dan Sullivan, Ben Hardy type, where in between the sections or the chapters we haven't decided yet. We have to hash it out. We do an interview in between and talk about the material between she and I.
Very
So
cool.
yeah, it'll be
Yeah.
fun. It'll be fun. I want to make it fun. I don't want to make it just blah, 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 blah. Peanuts voice. Here's my book. You could read it. You can read it in half the time. Don't put me on 2x speed.
Yeah.
So I just want to make it fun. It's a lot. We always unpack a lot though. So the 51%, you got me thinking on that. How do you know? So, you decide to continue another year and in triathlon because this is your choice. But what some people don't think that even if they have a traditional career, they choose to go to work every day. You choose to get out of bed. You choose that career, even if you went to medical school for 4 years, you went to residency for 3 years, 4 years, 7 years, you did a fellowship, you invested a lot, the government invested a lot, believe it or not. Because here the tuition is so high, you're like, the government invested what? It actually does.
Yeah, fair.
You invested the better part of, 10 years to in this career, which kind of is sort of where you are right now. And you think about it and you're like, but it's almost like throwing good money after bad. So do you continue in your career? Or like you said, the Sebastian Kienle, do you think, all right, listen, is the enjoyment overriding the misery?
Yeah.
What are some of the factors that how do you determine? I mean, it can't really be a number. I guess no, it's Cody. It can be a number. How do you determine if it's 51%?
That's a great question. Oh man, I do not have a good answer for that one, actually, Maureen.
Not yet.
No, but I can look at things like, asking myself every day, how's my mood? How am I feeling about getting out the door for my training sessions? Am I dragging ass? Am I excited about it? And I realize consistently there are some things that keep me excited about it, you know, like surrounding myself with enthusiastic, supportive people,
Mhm.
not just training partners, but also sponsors. I work with a manager who had breathed new life into my career after I was about ready to quit in 2021. And so that's been a key piece. And that's a big departure from like this lone wolf mentality that I had in university, where I thought I could be this self-taught expert in every aspect of the sport, which looking back is a joke because you can't be an expert in three different elite sports, plus our fourth discipline of nutrition, plus sports psychology, plus what else have you? Yeah,
Recovery. Yeah. I mean,
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, so I've really swung to the other side of that now, and I'm happy to bring in experts to help me on pretty much every aspect of my career. So that's been important to keep me going. But it is still like a daily choice to keep going. And I try not to get too hung up on sunk costs. You know, you talked about pouring 10 years of training post-secondary to become a doctor. That's a big investment. I'm thankful to not be quite in that position, but like there is still probably a decade worth of investment and toil to get where I am. But that doesn't mean that I have to keep going and doing it, you know?
Right.
I think I have to have the self-belief, and maybe I'm talking myself into this, but I truly have to hold the self-belief that I will land on my feet and the next act of my career is also going to be fun and exciting. Because this one was never planned and something wonderful came along. So
And the
for
next
someone,
wonderful thing, or the next thing that comes along might be just as wonderful and or more, because
yeah,
we don't know what's coming,
it's true. Yeah.
I mean,
But
and this
I'd
this
be lying to say I'm not terrified by it, you know, especially like I'm 34 and at this stage
over
of
the
my
hill, damn it.
career, I mean, a 38-year-old who you know very well, Patrick Lang, just won the Ironman World Championships, so that gives us all hope.
Yep.
But at this stage of my career, practically every interview I do with sports journalists, they ask some version of the question like, "So how many more good years do you think you have?" Or "When are you going to throw in the towel? Do you think your best performances are behind you?" I had a well-meaning but very blunt kid stand up at the last pro briefing I did. And, you know, he's like, Cody, you had some great races here on this course back in 2018, 2019. Then you struggled for a couple of years. Do you think you'll ever get to that level again? And I kind of fumbled the question because I'm like, the truth is, I don't know. I could get up here and be full of bravado and say like, oh, hell yeah, you know, my best years are ahead of me. I'm just on the upswing here. There's a comeback arc, whatever. But you just never know. I don't
You
promise
don't.
anything to sponsors, to fans anymore. Like there are really no guarantees in the sport. For every athlete who's closed out their career in a beautiful, planned way, 10 others who I know personally have fizzled out, gotten injured, crashed their
Imploded in my
bikes.
garage.
Yeah, you've had more than a few athletes quit in your kitchen in your garage.
I'm like, what do you mean you quit? Like triathlon?
Yeah,
Yeah, that was Ferris.
yeah. Something about that Ironman Texas course, I think it helps you know when you're done.
Oh, it's yeah. I think any Ironman though makes you pay in one
Yeah,
way or another. Whether it's an easy course or it always makes Ironman always makes you pay, and it always makes you dig, and it always makes you think. Because what
yeah.
else are you gonna do out there?
Yeah, I think some of the most valuable introspection I found is on that lonely back half of an Ironman marathon. You know, that's a lot of time deep inside your head.
I thought you were
And
gonna say the lonely back half of the bike, because really mile 87 and beyond
oh,
on the bike is where I'm just thinking a
I
lot,
mean, true, yeah,
crying, crying that I'm
yeah,
only halfway done with my day.
yeah. Any half decent Ironman performance always has some tears before, during, or after, or all three.
Right. And some are happy tears, some are sad tears. Just
Yeah,
depends on the moment.
yeah,
I
it really emotionally sensitizes you, doesn't it?
it just it is it's like I talk about this sort of in the book about going through rough emotional times, and doing an Ironman is like living a life in one day, because
Mm,
it tears you down. It's like walking around bleeding from your eyeballs. If you've ever gone through, which you have, just a very emotional transformation where for me, I knew I couldn't live the way I was. So when I was in residency in medical school and every year before that, I was very hypercritical of myself and everybody else. It was painful. It was hard to be around. I still have bits of that show up. Again, the grooves are deep. But it just trying to get rid of that, because I decided that I could not any longer live that way. So my option was either change it or go the other way, which wasn't, I didn't want to. I just couldn't,
mm,
I could not live in my head any longer. So I had to change the way my brain worked actively. And it was like walking around bleeding from my eyeballs because I had to tear everything down.
mm.
That was hard.
Did you accomplish that process just through your own training and self-discovery and Ironman journey, or what else, what other components were there? Because
So,
one thing I just qualify, one thing that
yeah.
I really regret is like I knew I would have benefited from therapy back in university and stubbornly didn't do it for some reason. And I feel like that delayed what could have been. that could have been a catalyst that would have expedited a lot of self-development much more quickly than it ended up happening more organically over the course of 10 years. So regret is that I wish I could go back and, find a therapist with a good vibe and work through a lot of this hopefully much faster. So did you find not necessarily therapy, but what other components were helpful for you?
Well, to speak to that, I think especially weirdly in my business journey, so much of the business part has nothing to do with accounting, has nothing to do with, it has to do with the person you become in your next career, right? It's not about, and that, or it's really not your next career. It's your next iteration. It's Cody 3.0. What is Cody 3.0 going to look like? That's not going to be determined by Cody. That's going to be determined by the universe's expression through Cody and what Cody's value is to the world. And that's going to be probably greater than you think by a factor of 10. So I think that if you rely on yourself, you pigeonhole yourself into that one view that, oh, I can be self-taught as a triathlete. What Olympic athlete goes out there without a coach? Zero.
Yeah.
They're not doing it because it's dumb. You have to find people. Dan Martell is 100 steps beyond me. I have
Mm.
another coach, Adam Lamb, who is between Dan and I. So I've got in this current iteration, I don't know. It's probably we're at like 12.0 by now because I'm old. So I say I'm old. I'm hoping this is a midlife crisis because being 102 would be fine. So, but you've got people, if you had found a therapist, for example, or not even a therapist necessarily, a mentor, a coach, a
Yeah,
therapist. I was in therapy. I was in therapy for a bunch of years. I loved my therapist, but I would come home and binge after every therapy session.
that's fascinating. Wow.
So I actually went the route of sponsorship in a 12-step group instead of therapy. Like
Oh,
I
really?
morphed that way over the years
Hmm.
because it was just sometimes not a gentler interaction, but more of a lateral interaction, like almost mutual mentorship. I never picked a sponsor that talked down to me.
Mm.
I always, I do the same thing now. I've got people that I meet with once a week that we bat things
Yeah.
back and forth. Rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah. I've also found a lot of value in peer-to-peer type interaction like that. The only people who I can truly commiserate with, who only really truly get it about pro triathlon are other pro triathletes right
Mhm.
now. That's not to say there's no value, and I have like more aspirational mentors, people in other spheres of life.
Right.
But the only people who really get what's happening in my life are other pro triathletes,
Yeah. No one's going
right
to
now.
understand, you know? And that's part of why, 2025, my focus is really helping physicians create lives that they love. Ideally, stay in medicine a little bit because we
Mm.
need doctors. We're dying here, literally.
Yeah.
We need more. But helping them stay in medicine also in ways that feed their soul because no one can understand what they feel
Mm.
unless they've been through it. And I didn't think I was doing that poorly until I got on the other side and thought, "Oh, boy, you could have improved some things back then." And but I didn't see it because you can't see it when you're in the middle of it.
Yeah. Before we started recording, you were talking about staving off burnout in ER medicine, and is there anything you do differently there? That's a high burnout career, like very notoriously high burnout. And I say this with no knowledge of actually being a doctor. That just has a reputation.
It
Is
does.
that inherent to it, or could you tell yourself things 10 years ago that might help you mitigate some of that creeping burnout?
One of the things I wished I would have done. So for me, health was the last piece to fall into place.
Hmm.
That is the absolute first piece I harp on with my clients. It cannot be the last piece. It has to be that's why health is everything. That's why the podcast is what it is.
Yeah.
Because for me, I worked on mindset. I worked on my finances. All that stuff was kind of like dialed in, we're doing pretty well.
Yeah.
You know, but until my health got where it needed to be, I could not make clear-headed decisions. There was always I should have, I know, I should shoulding all over myself over here. If I could do it, well, I'd never do it differently because then I also did not have would not have the insight to help other people. So,
I get that. Yeah.
going forward with my clients, I will so what I actually do now, which is a change from when I was coaching 4 years ago,
Hmm.
is that we have a 90-day program to get your health on track first. Once we free up that space, then you transfer into the elite provider mastermind, that like,
Mm.
then you go, but we need to work one on one and get your health in check. We need to
Yep.
figure it out. And if people say, my health is fine, I thought mine was too. That little heart lesion in there, which is
Yeah.
unfortunately old and new. So I know it's not just old crusty because people say, oh, there's cardiac burden in endurance athletes. It's not what that is. That's a
Yeah.
plaque. It's a squishy plaque that's just waiting to break off and kill me. Yes, I'm a little bit morbid. Sorry. But sorry, not sorry. But it's true. So, I mean, I think burnout, the average physician, female physician in emergency medicine leaves the profession at age 44.
Wow. What a statistic. And that's after presumably starting around 30 because of how long the training takes.
I think they get out. So if you're 18 to 22 is college, roughly 22 to 26 is the earliest you're starting is 29, unless you go to a 6-year
Wow.
program. But you know what I'm saying?
And
It's late.
specialists would be even later,
Yeah.
presumably. Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, it's funny. All of this mirrors some discussions I've been having with my partner, who's very early into his career in marketing and working really, really hard and starting to realize you can't make too many of these trade-offs. And I've learned this the hard way, and I'm trying to instill in him like the fundamental pillars. It always has to be sleep, nutrition, exercise, and everything else can come after that. You have to very selfishly put those three things first because otherwise your health is on borrowed time and things will start to crumble around that. So that
I
kind of has
agree.
to be like you fill those things into your whatever approach you take for scheduling or time blocking, you make the time for those things first. And then even like your relationships, everything else I think has to come after those three fundamental self-care things. And for me, like I've been a chronic insomniac for a lot of my life. Sleep's been a big struggle. The quickest way to bring me to the worst version of myself is trading sleep for anything else.
Yeah.
So that is like the fundamental
I
underpinning of my
love that.
mental health, my ability to be productive, my financial health, everything else, how good of a partner I am, how good of a son I am, brother, everything. Sleep first.
Well, I was actually going to say, try going on a date night on no sleep.
Yeah.
It's a perfect way to torpedo the weekend. I mean, it is just, and lately my sleep's been really off.
Hmm.
Food was off for a little bit, Thanksgiving. So I just had a colonoscopy. Also entertaining because,
Oh yeah.
well, I was actually, so crazy thing, I ended up getting the heart workup because I was having chest pain. It's not heart related chest pain, but then I couldn't swallow. So I spent a couple weeks thinking, do I
Oh
have cancer?
man.
You
Oh, that's
know,
terrifying.
like I couldn't eat food normally. And I've actually narrowed it down to certain foods that trigger it. I don't have any evidence of eosinophilia, so I don't have any biopsy evidence of it, but certain foods, if I eat them, I cannot eat after, which is
Hmm.
super bizarre, but whatever. I just think I'm crazy and I'm okay with that. So, it was funny. I was talking to another ER doc. He's like, "Oh yeah, we can manage crazy as long as it's not cancer. We're good." So,
Real, wow.
I mean, it's all a hierarchy. But my point in this is that between changing my diet for the colonoscopy, low residue diet, blah blah blah, so it was all like literally white food. How many, just boring white
Oh, so
sugar.
like my diet when I'm eating 5,000 calories and mostly carbs a day, I can understand that.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So it's that. So all my triggers are flipped in my head.
Hmm.
Then right after we have Thanksgiving, which is a food related holiday with family.
Hmm. Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's
Enough said. Yeah.
fun. And it took me, I mean, it's December, 19th. When we're recording this, won't be out probably till after the first of the year, but the holidays are a lot of triggers for a lot of people for
Hmm.
depression, for, I mean, even like you said, suicidal. That was bad. That's going to get flagged on Rebecca, edit that part out. So, because that will get flagged. Um, there are certain words you don't talk about. Seasonal affective disorder is real. It is absolutely real.
Oh, tell me about
And
it. Yeah.
so between that and it's all this time where you're supposed to be jolly over the holidays. Now, my birthday's in December, so I love the whole month. I party the whole month. Every day I wake up and I'm like, it's December. All the cool kids are born in December. Life is good. But that's the way I've cultivated things because I grew up in Buffalo. There is not much good in Buffalo in December except for hockey and Labatt. I mean,
Yeah.
so And I don't do either of those, but I can still skate. I found that out last week.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
There's an ice rink here in the winter. And last year was the first year we went, and we went again this year. And this year, Matthew and I both wore my old hockey skates because I have two sets.
Aw.
And I was like, "Oh, how fun is that?" And now he grew out of them already. It was like a week and a half ago. But yeah, his little friends were like, "Your mom's really good on skates." I'm not. It's like being a good swimmer in triathlon. You just have to be better than everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. I am not a very impressive skater despite growing up in small town Canada in a class of boys who all played hockey. And I did swim team and was probably would have been voted the least likely to become a professional athlete, as an 8-year-old, but none of them made the NHL, so
I was gonna say, what are they doing now? So it just depends, right? No, it depends on what we're called to do. I honestly, I truly believe, and I think you're a perfect example of following that path. Well, following that path until it's actually over, right? You're not just throwing a toddler temper tantrum and saying, I'm not doing this anymore. It's not fun. Well, it's not fun today. You can't quit on a bad day. You've got to take a reasonable
yeah,
look at, you know, it's an opportunity of a lifetime to become a professional athlete for a lot of
it
people.
is. I mean, I've had to be talked off the ledge a few times. And my manager has a policy, no quitting triathlon in over the winter, when things are bleak, like we're talking about. But I think I really quit almost for real. Well, I did without really telling anyone in 2021. And that prompted a series of conversations with athletes I admire who were either late in their career or recently retired. And I had this series of conversations like, how did you know it was time?
Hmm.
And one of the best insights to come from that, and it's so obvious, was that pretty much everything else I want to do with my life can wait. And triathlon has this biological clock built into it, Like we talked about, a 38-year-old just won the world championships. That's historically a little on the older side of what you see, but pretty much everyone is done by the time they're in their early 40s at a world-class level, at least, if you're lucky,
Right.
and often much sooner than that. So I hate to look back with regret and go, no, I squandered those years where I could have been achieving my world class potential in triathlon.
Right.
And like, I've had a novel outline, been working on for like 2 years now. I would love to sink my teeth into that. But all these things can wait. My
Yeah.
world class potential as an athlete, the clock is ticking down on that. And the last few years made me really painfully aware of that.
So it's funny because my husband Greg, who you know very well, we were talking about emergency medicine probably about a year and a half ago when he's kind of looking at this season in our lives and how much longer he's going to work full time. It actually
Hmm.
correlates quite closely with what you're talking about because
Oh, yeah.
he goes, emergency medicine is a young man's game. And it is like in order to do that, the nurses used to ask me, do you get holiday pay? I'm like, yeah, I'm required to work holidays and I get paid. Like that's it's just what it is. It's just another
Yeah.
day. And when you sign up for emergency medicine, you sign up for, I worked nights for 15 years because I love nights in the ER. I don't work days in the ER. That's not my day job. That's who I was, a nighttime ER doc at Memorial Hermann for 13 years full time.
Hmm.
That also hurt me in the transition because that so much of my identity was tied up in that, which I think that's probably what terrifies you a bit about the shift.
Oh yeah, man, that's a whole conversation. Unwinding your self-identity from your current career, something that's been the focus of your life for a long period of time. That, yeah, I think the pandemic actually really, if one positive thing came out of the pandemic for me personally, it was having triathlon largely taken from me and having to confront how much of my self-identity was wrapped up in the sport and making the connection that triathlon will eventually be taken from me for good, at least as a professional athlete.
Mhm.
And how will I deal with that? And I realized at that time it would have been poorly. And that was also when I was having these conversations with these other retired professional athletes. And I realized a lot of them struggled profoundly with this transition and their mental health. And you can't just fly by the seat of your pants with this. You have to start to think about a transition strategy. And I don't just mean like, how will I make money next?
Right.
It's way beyond that. It's
And
like,
people don't see it coming. I
how will
didn't see it
I,
coming.
yeah, how will I unwind this profound physiological addiction to exercise? Number
Oh, I wish I
one.
had that.
Yeah, still working on that one. yeah, you have to, I think you have to wean yourself off of it. You
I
have
just
to
need the
taper off.
addiction part first, to be honest. Like,
Yeah. And
nope.
yeah, how will you find joy and fulfillment in other parts of your life? Because
Mhm.
this this era of my life, the pro triathlon, it takes up a lot of time. And so what am I going to do with that newfound blank space? I'm still working on that one.
Yeah, it was very stressful for me when I left emergency medicine in the main ER where I was. I did not leave. It was not my choice. Now, in retrospect, I was the worst employee ever, so I deserved to get the boot. So I just got too loud. I just it's all good. I realized going back, I'm probably the worst employee ever, always. It just kind of hit that
I'm not
critical
buying
mass.
that.
I am. I'm always like, hey, I want to make this better. I want to make this better. And like, I'm tiresome for a boss. I'm like a toddler being like, mom, 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 mom. Like, because I always want to push and make things better.
Yeah.
Now I'm in an okay place because my boss is a jerk. I'm okay with that because it's me. So, now it's okay. But it took me nearly a year and a half. I lost half my hair. I got shingles to I mean, after every shift, because I was still working in a smaller ER very often. Even now, when I just recently, 2 years after, we're coming up exactly on 2 years since I left the main, I am finally not having an existential crisis every time I walk in, thinking, oh, should I work? I like this is such a big part of who I am. I
Yeah,
am finally understanding that the shift has occurred, but it took me 2 years. And I had nobody to help me through.
really.
Like, you know why? Because we had one of our specialists in the area recently pass away, liver cancer. I'm sorry.
Hmm.
Well, it was mets to the liver from a different cancer, and he died working. Like not working that day, right? But he worked like that's when people leave medicine. People leave triathlon because their bodies give out. People leave medicine because their bodies give out. When people retire from the police force, a lot of them do, unfortunately, take their own lives because their identity is so wrapped up in that they cannot make
Hmm.
that shift successfully. So, it's not about, like you said, it's not about making money. When I teach physicians, hey, let's look at these other fun income streams. This isn't passive income. It's not about real estate. This is about having fun, being relevant, choosing relevance over retirement. Because when you stop doing what you've done for so many years and what you trained for, what you are at your core, you have to understand it's not your core.
Hmm.
It only feels that way.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And I didn't have anybody. It sucked. I'd like to compress that into about 6 months for people at the max. Let's go. You can make way more money other places. So that way you can go to work because you want to, not because you have to.
Hmm. So did that painful transition inspire the work you're doing now?
Yes, 100%. I don't ever want people to feel alone. There were parts of my childhood where I just felt really alone. And food was always a great companion, worked fantastically, probably saved my life in a couple of spots, So I don't really regret the food issues, but I don't ever want people to feel as alone as I've felt, whether it's fat loss journey, whether it's going through medical school, being married, being a parent, thinking you're screwing all that up every day. It's just, I don't want people to feel alone because you're not. And I think a lot of people don't leave medicine because it's easier just to work another shift. It is easier. And you do that until you die. And that would have been my path because I don't think I would have had the guts to leave. I joked if it hadn't happened the way it happened, I would have been 80, 85 years old in Trauma Bay 3 having a heart attack. Wouldn't have lasted that long, by the way, now that I know that. But would have been 85 in Trauma Bay 3 running a trauma, dying of a heart attack in there. They got to bring in another doctor because I'm dead on the ground. So,
Oh man, shouldn't be laughing so hard at this,
no,
but
but that's true
you're
though.
painting quite a picture.
But believe me, I've got the whole thing in my head because that's the road I was on. I
Yeah.
loved my job. I never planned to leave that main. Even if I found a side gig that was lucrative enough for me to decompress, I still wanted to work 6 or 7 shifts indefinitely.
Mhm.
And I would have, but it still would have taken a toll. It's still, again, much like professional triathlon, working overnight. I don't care how you slice it. And I was a good sleeper. I slept 7 to 8 hours between shifts. I was
Mm.
very dialed in. The food obviously was what it was. But I never stopped working on the food. I never stopped trying to improve. I couldn't make an effective change until about 2.5 years ago, but I never stopped working on the food. I in that emergency medicine career, I did 7 full Ironmans, bunches of other things in there,
Wow.
here. But so was I burnt out? I don't even think I was burnt out. I was just tired. I think there's a difference.
I think there's a big difference. Yeah. That I wondered that too. Like, have I been through phases of burnout in triathlon, or am I just tired and needing a change? I'm still excited about a lot of things. So I don't think most of the time it's actually been true burnout. That's a term that people throw around a lot,
Hmm.
which probably has a more specific meaning than we usually intend.
I agree. And Greg's actually finishing up his PhD in health and human performance, and his dissertation is on burnout.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So oddly enough, it's so funny because we have taken completely different routes the last 4 years and ended up at the same place at the end.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
I'm not surprised, and I'm very thankful for that. But he's actually, I'll let the cat out of the bag a little bit, but he actually did research on proving that burnout is not an occupational disorder, it's a lifestyle disorder.
Mm.
Because we always say it's from work. But a couple of key indicators, if you think of you and then someone else in your same job, not everybody's at the same level of burnout. So if it was always the job, everyone would be burned out. And it's not. It's not the case. It's the people with the habits behind, like you said, sleep, nutrition, exercise slash activity. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. We all know what to do, so why don't we do it?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Right? I mean, I have more education in this overstuffed brain of mine. I could not make it happen. Because you know what? Your frontal lobe's not driving the bus. At those times when you're not sleeping well, right? It's a cycle. Your frontal lobe's no longer driving the bus. You're not sleeping well, which means you're not going to make good food choices, which means you're not going to hydrate. You're sure as heck not going to recover because you're feeling like you're not doing enough because you're just not doing enough, right? And then the spiral starts and there you go.
Yes. Yeah.
So
Yep. I've certainly been there.
I'm like, wow, that pretty much summed it up right there. So we have to wrap it up. I don't want to. I could talk for 3 more hours.
We certainly could.
We'll come back and do this again. So thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad to finally have you on. We will definitely record another episode. On
I
the
would
flip
love to.
side, yes, yes, sounds good. So Cody, if people want to follow you on social, where do they find you?
You can find me at Cody.Beals on Instagram or sometimes TikTok if it's not banned, and CodyBeals.com is my website.
I know, right? We always have the Instagram, TikTok disclaimer because if it's not there, find us on Instagram.
Sure.
All right, guys, we'll see you in the next episode.